Welcome to Rodi Underworld. Today, we're dissecting the soul of North Jersey's most volatile prodigy, Christopher Moltisanti, Tony Soprano's nephew, the heir apparent, the family's biggest rebel. Was Chrissy truly just a lost soul, a sensitive artist destroyed by his uncle Tony? Or was he, like Tony, a cold, calculated monster lurking beneath the surface? Let's take a closer look at the restless kid from North Jersey who was constantly searching for his own truth. Christopher was born in 1969, right into the thick of mafia reality. North Jersey was a habitat where organized crime was accepted and violence was normalized. His father, Dickie, was a fast-living macho gangster. His mother, Joanne, a melancholic, cold alcoholic who was tired of Dickie's life. Dickie died in a mob hit when Chris was just a baby. He grew up fatherless. When our story begins in '99, Chris is a young gangster in his early 30s. Dickie. The father Chris never knew was a legend, a brave mafioso, a feared man. But for Chris, his father was just a distorted ideal. His mother's emotional distance, combined with his father's absence, left a deep void in Chris's heart, a crippling crisis of belonging. Then, a large man steps onto the stage to fill that void. Tony Soprano. Tony, Chris's uncle through the Italian lineage, is a rising mob boss in '99. He's a successful underworld tactician, charismatic, and a capable leader. The dictionary definition of an alpha male, he more than fulfills the need for a purpose and a father figure in Chris's life. As Christopher himself said, his only dream since childhood was to join Tony Soprano's crew. But here's the tragic flaw. This was not the kind of belonging Chris truly needed. Tony loved Chrissy not for who Chris was, but only as long as he was his loyal henchman. Remember when Chris acted like himself, pitching his screenplay idea? Tony grabbed him by the throat and threatened him. Because Tony had drawn clear lines, and as long as Chris never crossed them, he was a valuable investment. We actually meet two distinct crises throughout the series. On one side, there is the sensitive Chris, the aspiring screenwriter, the deeply troubled soul, the passionate lover to Adriana, the brave man who criticizes Tony's hypocrisy to his face. He is emotional, critical, and arguably the better side of the coin. Then there is the other side, the dark Chris. The violent, cynical monster who beats men for Tony, commits murder for the family, cheats on Adriana constantly, and physically abuses his fiancée. This dark side was crucial for him to gain Tony's respect. The mob world Chris aspired to was built on self-interest, not ideals. On ruthlessness, not honor. On deceit, not rules. And worse, his sole idol, Tony, was just as corrupt and fake as the system itself. Tony used Chris for his dirtiest work, the Ralph Cifaretto murder, or the potential assassination of boss Carmine Lupertazzi. Chris was Tony's black box, kept closer than anyone else due to their kinship and their mentor-apprentice bond. But Tony didn't do this out of pure affection. His goal was to groom Chris as his successor, to use him as a shield against the FBI, and to manage the family from behind the scenes at Darth Sidious, trying to create his Darth Vader. The problem? The world is hell for sensitive souls. To cope with the reality of living a life contradictory to his artistic, loving side, Chris turned to drugs. He wasn't entirely remorseless about his crimes. His first victim, the Chechen gangster Emil Kohler, haunted his nightmares. Addiction became Chris's escape from Tony, from the family, and from his own guilt. Tony, acting the part of the concerned uncle, sent him to rehab but drew the line clearly. Addicts don't rise in the mob. They become risks and are quickly executed. If Chris survived his addiction within the mob, it was purely due to nepotism, Tony's favoritism. Chris successfully completes rehab, supported by his fiancée Adriana, despite his abuse and infidelity. Yet, his sobriety becomes another point of mockery within the mob. Paulie Walnuts, always resentful of Chris's relative status, never misses a chance to humiliate him. Remember when Paulie stripped Chris naked under the pretense of a new wiretap protocol and mocked his penis size in front of the other gangsters? But the real seismic event that shatters Chris's world is when Tony betrays him. While Chris is out of town, Tony gets intimate with Adriana. Though they don't fully consummate the affair due to a car crash, the rumors fly. Chris's fiancée becomes talk of the town. In a rage, Chris shoots up Tony's car. Tony comes dangerously close to killing his nephew and his project. He's only stopped by Polly and cousin Tony Blundetto. Chris chooses to bury his suspicions and believe in Tony. Yet, sinking his doubts and staying sober doesn't stop the humiliation. Now, both Tony Soprano and Blundetto start bullying him. They mock his addiction and his 12-step program. Chris looks to Tony for the protective stance he desperately needs, but Tony smiles and joins in the fun. The message is deafening. Your place next to Tony is fixed. You are condemned to be the bullied child you once were. Despite this constant devaluation, Chris begins to rise in the mob. But this requires the most unthinkable sacrifice: Adriana. Adriana was the purest emotional connection Chris had. Despite his constant cheating, she stood by him and supported his sobriety. The FBI saw her as a weak link and forced her into becoming an informant. She tells Chris everything. Knowing he has complained about Tony for years, she urges him, "Let's cooperate with the FBI. We can enter witness protection, start a new life, and you can focus on your cinema dream." At this critical juncture, Chris makes the choice of his life. He stalls Adriana, walks out of the house, and immediately calls Tony. He tells him everything. Adriana is soon executed by Silvio in a tragic, isolated scene. Chris has made his choice. He chose Tony and the mob over Adriana and everything he claimed to love. His choice is immediately rewarded. Chris is promoted to capo, taking over Polly's crew. He's one step closer to Tony's seat. He marries Kelly, has a baby girl, and enters the peak of his career and life status. But the peak is the last stop before the fall, and Chris's fall is profoundly poetic. He has everything he wanted. He's a capo. He drives a Hummer, he has a big house, a wife, a child, and he even produces his dream film, Cleaver. Yet, the illusion begins to crack. In his film, the mob boss gets close to the protagonist's fiancée, a clear subconscious reference to the Tony-Adriana near affair. Chris couldn't stop himself from including this painful truth. The implication is clear to every gangster who watches the film. Chris is also neglecting the bada bing due to his sobriety. These elements devalue him in Tony's eyes. Tony knows, subconsciously, that Chris will never truly forgive him. The consequences of losing Tony's favor are swift. In a scene where Chris tries to talk about his child and fatherhood with Tony and Polly, Polly viciously mocks him, suggesting Chris's daughter will end up in a strip club. Chris collapses internally when he sees Tony laughing along. Everything he sacrificed Adriana, his sanity, his dreams meant nothing. He was still Tony's disposable subordinate. In his disillusionment, Chris shows up drunk at his writer friend JT Doolan's house. When Chris starts confessing mob details, JT warns him, "Chris, you're in the mafia." JT knows hearing this makes him a target. This final rejection is too much for Chris. He pulls a gun and kills JT Dolan simply for not listening to his drunken ramblings. Up until this point, most of Chris's actions could be viewed as the actions of a mob soldier. But the murder of JT Dolana, man who was just trying to help him and who only listened to his confession out of friendship, is Chris's defining act of evil. He committed this murder purely out of internal anguish and rejection. It had no justifiable basis in the mob code. Chris, without a doubt, turned into a monster. But in this jungle, there are bigger monsters. Following these events, Chris relapses into drugs and alcohol. Driving Tony home from a meeting, he loses control of the car and flips it. Tony is able to crawl out, but Chris is trapped and needs help. Chris, panicking, gives Tony the critical information. "I'll lose my license, they'll find the substances in my blood." Tony looks at the baby seat in the back, processes the information, and makes his decision. Chris is no longer an asset. He is a liability and a risk. Tony suffocates Chris with his own hand and makes it look like a tragic accident. Christopher Moltisanti is the product of a culture where crime is the norm. In the beginning, he was a villain shaped by his environment. But by sacrificing Adriana and then casually executing JT Dolan out of emotional spite, Chris transformed from a troubled soul into a pure sociopathic killer. Though Tony and the system pushed him down this path, Chris, through his final, darkest choices, chose to embrace the monster within. Thank you for watching, friends. We want to hear your thoughts on Chrissy. Was he a martyr, or always a monster waiting to surface? Let us know in the comments below. Join us next time on Rodi Underworld as we dissect the next character in the mob universe.